Good morning, folks. Welcome back to Indycar. My name is Gordon Ross. Today I'm in Summerston, and today's show is about two things. First thing was last night we saw for the first time a massive reusable rocket demonstrated by Elon Musk's company SpaceX. Largest rocket in the world at the moment, and capable of sending large payloads either into geosynchronous orbit, that's where they put weather satellites, or further out into space towards the planets such as Mars. Now, until recently, sending a probe to Mars would have cost billions of dollars, and it would have been the preserve of big international space agencies like NASA, or the Russians, or the Chinese. But now, Elon Musk's company SpaceX has proved that a private venture, can actually launch a rocket to Mars, and not only launch a rocket to Mars successfully, but reuse the components of it over and over again. And this is the interesting part. Elon Musk's system of recovering the rocket boosters, flying them back and landing them at the launch site means that they can be reused over and over again. And this cuts the cost of access to space to a fraction of what it would cost if we were doing things in the old-fashioned way, where we threw away the rocket boosters and let them burn up. What this means in effect is that you can now send a mission to Mars for a tenth of the cost of sending a mission using a NASA system. NASA typically costs about over £1 billion to send a space probe to Mars. With Elon Musk's new SpaceX system, the Falcon Heavy, we can now see that reducing to somewhere in the region of $93 million for a trip to Mars, which is a remarkable achievement. It's a scaling down of the costs of space exploration by a factor of 10, a remarkable achievement. And I think, although many people didn't realise it at the time, we were witnessing the start of a new industrial revolution in space. The cheap access to space means that getting into orbit is going to be cheaper, so more people will be able to fly into orbit. It means the construction of things like space hotels. It means being able to go back to the moon, set up a moon base. It means the colonisation of Mars is now feasible. All kinds of things are coming within the reach of human beings. From the point of view of Scotland, it means that there is a new space race on, and it's a private venture space race. Scotland, as I mentioned in the previous programme, has one of the busiest satellite manufacturing companies anywhere in the world. And it's located, strangely, in Glasgow. And at the moment, it's located not far from where I'm sitting in Maryhill. So we have a satellite builder in Scotland, and it's a uniquely Scottish venture. It produces microsatellites, in which they have shrunk the satellite down from something the size of a huge car to the size of a clock radio, something much smaller, a little CubeSat, but with massive capabilities built into much smaller units. So these things also are manufactured here, make space cheaper, make satellite building far cheaper, and because of that, Scotland has become the place to go if you want satellites at a decent price. Now, from the point of view of independent Scotland, once Scotland has become independent, there's no reason why its space industries can't expand fairly rapidly, even including, if we wanted to do it, a spaceport or maybe two spaceports of our own. Spaceports can do two things. They can launch rockets vertically to put things into orbit, or they can allow short flights into space using things like space planes or vertically launched sounding rockets which go straight up rather than into orbit. But either way, space tourism is coming now, and there are at least 4 companies now vying for our money to launch us into space, and people are willing to pay the thousands and thousands of dollars it costs to go on one of these flights. Even the short flights, which last only 10 minutes and take you 100 miles straight up, there is a queue for those. And Scotland also is uniquely positioned so that it can actually launch its own rockets. The Western Isles off the coast of Scotland have a clear line of sight towards the North Pole, and that means they can be used for launching what's known as polar orbiting satellites. These are ones which, instead of going around the equator, go over the top of the poles. And they are the kind of orbits which are used typically for scanning the Earth. The military use them for spying on each other, but access to those orbits has been limited up until recently to military satellites. But they're excellent orbits from which to look at things like the polar ice caps, to monitor global warming, and to look at the way crops and land use is working on the ground. So there is a possibility for Scotland to be at the ground floor, if you like, of this new space race, this new space industrialisation race. And I think what Elon Musk demonstrated yesterday with his Falcon Heavy rocket is that they can now build rockets which are entirely reusable, which fly back to base once they've launched their satellite or their human passengers into orbit, return to base and land successfully. And that means they can be reused over and over again. And Falcon 9, the precursor of this Falcon Heavy, is already doing that. It's sending payloads of supplies up to the International Space Station, and then it's returning to Earth with the boosters in one piece ready to use again. Okay, so that's one item of news which was big yesterday, and at the moment there is a car, a Tesla red sports car, which is owned by Elon Musk, who also owns Tesla Car Company. And that car is currently on a trajectory which will intersect with the orbit of Mars in about 6 months' time. It's not going to land on Mars, it won't go into orbit around the red planet, but it will cross the orbit of Mars. And you should actually be able to see Mars from the car window, and there are cameras mounted on that car as it goes out to Mars on its way, to demonstrate that they can reach Mars with this rocket. But it's not going to go into orbit around Mars, it's not going to crash into Mars, and it will just continue on this orbit around the Earth in an eccentric orbit forever, effectively. It's not going to crash into anything. But as a demonstration, it was remarkable, and I think everybody who watched it gasped as they saw the two rocket boosters that had sent the rocket up return back to Cape Canaveral and land simultaneously next to each other. It was a beautiful sight to see, quite a remarkable feat. Okay, now that leads me on to the next subject. Somebody asked me if I would talk about defence. What will happen to Scotland's defensive forces after independence? This is a difficult question to answer because we would need to decide what our defensive posture is. Now, in some countries like Switzerland, they opt to be completely pacifist and not interfere in anybody else's wars. They become neutral. And if you're a neutral country, Ireland was neutral during the war, you don't enter into any wars that other people are having, and you don't assist them in any way. You basically stay out of it. By becoming neutral, you're saying to the rest of the world that you are not interested in any aggressive actions, and that you're not going to participate in anybody else's actions unless your country is threatened directly. And I think that's a reasonable position to start from. I mean, if it was me ruling Scotland, I'd like to start from that position of saying we are not interested in aggressive actions abroad. We're only interested in defending our own assets here, and that is all we will do. So if you take that as the first point or the first principle of Scottish defence, then you're looking at what you need to defend and what you're defending it from. And for Scotland, most of the things that it needs to defend are maritime assets. They're oil rigs, they are offshore wind turbines, they are offshore tide turbines, and they are fishing harbours. And then when you come back onto shore, you're looking at cities, you're looking at factories, and you're looking at critical things like power stations, petrochemical plants, things like that, oil pipelines, gas pipelines. So we're looking at defending a country from what? From a sea attack or from an air attack. So we're not going to need a large land army to do that. We will need a land army, but it doesn't have to be gigantic. What we would need is anti-aircraft defences and anti-ship and anti-submarine defences. So we would need a capable navy with sufficient surface vessels to patrol our marine assets constantly round the clock. So that means the North Sea, the Western Isles, west of Shetland, the Shetland Islands, virtually everywhere, all around the Clyde Estuary, the North Sea and the Irish Sea. A lot of distance to cover, so a capable navy means lots of ships, Lots of ships means we need to build lots of ships. That means lots of work for Scottish shipyards, for refitting work, for repairs, for engine manufacturers, and for defensive systems manufacturers. Scotland's air defences need to be twofold. They need anti-missile systems to protect from incoming ballistic missiles, incoming cruise missiles. Those sorts of defensive systems are already available off the shelf. Russia in particular has an excellent anti-missile system called the SS-400, and it's available pretty much as a system, or it could be developed into a bespoke system by Scottish engineers and Scottish scientists. Or we could develop a different system all by ourselves. We have the capability to do that, and in the past, Britain and Scotland developed its own nuclear missile system called Polaris, and Polaris was an entirely British system. It wasn't bought from the United States. The nuclear warheads were developed between the UK and the United States, but were all owned by the UK. Scotland, I don't think, needs nuclear weapons in order to be safe, and in fact I think having them here makes us less safe. So my own opinion about armed forces is it's a defensive system that we need. We need it to be technically extremely advanced. We need to defend ourselves from incoming ballistic missiles, from sea attacks or amphibious attacks, and from air attacks. All of these things are conventional, but at the same time we're going to need an extremely good domestic security force to guard against terrorism. And that means terrorism from any source. I don't mean Islamic terrorism. It could be extremist British nationalist. It could be extremist nationalists from somewhere else. It could be anybody really, but we need a secret service which is capable of defending Scotland against infiltration by terrorist cells. So those are the things that Scotland would need. I don't know exactly how it would transition, but I would imagine that people who are Scottish are currently employed as soldiers, airmen or sailors in the British Armed Forces would, if they are domiciled in Scotland normally, be given the choice of either staying in the British forces or transferring to the new Scottish Defence Force if they wished, under similar conditions to the ones that they were currently employed in. But that is something that would need to be negotiated between the new Scottish Government and the British Government after we've separated. So it's a big question to ask. I don't have all the answers. These are my own thoughts. If you have your own thoughts about this, please let me know. But bear in mind, if Scotland is developing things like its own space systems, then it's quite capable of defending itself against ballistic missiles, which are effectively space-based weapons that go into space, come back down, and target the enemy on the ground. And if Scotland is capable of developing space systems, it's capable of developing rockets, it's capable of developing missiles which can protect itself, and that would create yet more jobs in Scottish high-tech industries. That's where I'd like to leave it for today. I'm off to do some work now. As usual, if you have any thoughts on both the new space race that we've seen starting with this American rocket last night, or domestic space industry here and the domestic defence industry here, please let me know after the show. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.